Recording. There we go. Welcome to session number 21, the book of Joshua. This is an ongoing series in the survey of the Old Testament for all my friends in Italy and the Philippines and anybody else tuning in from around the world and ships at sea, apparently. Welcome. We're trying to make our way through the Old Testament. It will take roughly 60 hours by the time we get done, so we're not quite halfway through yet. And there are some parts that we're going to go through quicker than other parts. This is one of those parts that we'll go through relatively quickly. I usually allow 2 days for Joshua. So let's have a look at what's going on with the book of Joshua. I'm going to share the screen so we get I hope I can share the screen now. Let's see what it does. Nope. I'm going to have to stop the share and try it again. There we go. If it turns out this way every time, I'm going to be most put out, as we say. Okay, and kill some other stuff so that I've got my full screen. Okay, the outline of Joshua we went over briefly at the end of Monday's session is fairly straightforward. The invasion happens in the first 5 chapters. The conquest narrative happens in chapters 5 through 12. By the end of chapter 12, we've got a list of all of the places that were conquered. And chapters 13 to 21 is a detailed list of all of the cities and the boundaries for the tribal territories for Israel, as well as other things like the cities of refuge, the Levitical cities, and some other details along the way. The conclusion of the book with Joshua's final speech to the people is in chapters 22 through 24. Fairly straightforward outline for the book. And we'll launch right in with chapter 1 and the actual description of the invasion of Canaan. And again, I'm going to emphasize because modern critics like to say this is nothing more than mythology. This is a story told to give modern Jews a reason for taking the Holy Land, stuff like that. This book reads like history. As we walk through the book, the grammar is the grammar of a historical narrative. The details that are provided are the details that would be provided by an objective historian. We see Joshua complete with warts. He is not perfect. He occasionally does things wrong, and I'm going to have to mute. There we go. Joshua is not perfect. He is a heroic character on the order of Moses, but a level down from Moses. Joshua has the ability to call down miracles, which is a unique thing in the Bible. I'll emphasize that again. I've said this before. I'll repeat that miracles are relatively rare in the biblical narrative. We find miracles in the Class A biblical sense with Moses and Joshua and the founding of the nation. We see miracles again about 800 years later with Elijah and Elisha and the kicking off of the prophetic ministry in Israel. And then finally, we see miracles during the life of Christ and the apostles. Uh, Throughout most of biblical history, miracles didn't happen. And the authority of the prophets and the authority of Moses rested upon those miracles that were performed at that time. A biblical miracle happens in order to authenticate God's messenger and God's message. So that's what we're going to see continuing to happen in the book of Joshua. Later on, God does continue to answer prayer. God continues to do mighty acts on his own nickel. But what distinguishes what I call a class A biblical miracle is that the prophet himself has the authority to call down a miracle. The prophet speaks with God and calls down the miracle. The miracle happens. It's an apparent violation of natural law. So when Joshua begins leading the people into the promised land, we're going to see the miracles continue to happen. And this will happen for a brief time at the beginning of Joshua's life. And over time, the miracles cease because the authentication of Joshua's message and his authority are no longer needed. The miracles never happen for the convenience of God's people. The miracles happen to authenticate the scripture. Chapter 1 is the commission of Joshua. And this mosaic on the picture in the background, I like. It has nothing to do with Joshua. It's actually it's a very much more recent picture. It dates to the first centuries of the Christian era. And it's a picture of a gladiator fight taken on the island of Crete. But it gives you an idea of what people looked like when they were fighting in the Old Testament. It's fairly close. So the book starts out here in the first few verses. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant. Okay, so the highest honor that anyone can have in the Old Testament is to be called the servant of the Lord. The Greek is, or the Hebrew here, Raved Adonai, the servant of the Lord, is a very, very high calling. Joshua is Moses' servant. Moses is the servant of the Lord. And in this call, we're going to see Joshua promoted to the status of servant of the Lord. So this is a very high calling. The calling here is the official movement that God makes in the life of Joshua to put him into the position of leadership over the people. Moses has already done this, but this is the official call. Many Old Testament characters have a call. So we've seen the call of Abraham, we've seen the call of Moses, here the call of Joshua. Later on, we'll see the calls of some of the prophets. Isaiah is the most famous, but Ezekiel and Jeremiah also have these sequences where God speaks to the prophet. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you and appointed you to be a prophet. That kind of thing is going on, and that's what's happening here with Joshua. So God says to Joshua in verse 2, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, therefore, arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving to them, to the people of Israel. Okay, let's think about that for just a second. In these first 9 verses, we're seeing the message from God. And this is where I'm really going to camp for just a moment. We've got a call here that is a command from God. You now arise, cross the Jordan, you and all these people, into the land that I promised you. So God is in the process of fulfilling his promise to Israel. So get up, cross this Jordan, cross the river. The crossing or the crossing over is an interesting word. I'm going to see if I can stop this. Well, no, maybe I won't, because if I stop this, then I'll have to start that one, and this gets more complicated. I want to show you a map in a little bit, and then I'm going to show you this other word. The word to cross in Hebrew is avar, kind of a Habar, sort of like that. The word for the outlaw people groups who were coming out of the wilderness and causing trouble for the Canaanites in their letters back to Egypt is Abiru, same root. Habiru or Habiru means somebody who's crossed over. It is entirely possible that the word Hebrew comes from the root chabar, to cross over, and it started out as a nasty thing for Canaanites to say about the Israelites. They're not nice people. They crossed the river in the middle of the night, and we don't want them here. Or they're causing trouble. The original word Habiru referred to a fairly wide range of people groups. There are people who are obviously not Hebrews who are called Habiru by the Canaanites. And we find a similar term for nomadic people, shasu, that's used by Akkadian speaking people all over the Middle East. So it was a common bias that these illegal immigrants, which is what the Hebrews appeared to be to the Canaanites, deserved to be criticized, deserved to be mocked, and they were given the name Habiru. I believe the people of Israel heard that, and they adopted the name Hebrew as a result of that. So at any rate, here we are. Go over the Jordan, you and the people, into the land I'm going to give them, which is what God has been promising ever since Genesis 12 and the call of Abraham. That's been over 600 years. And now God is ready to fulfill this promise. Now, verse 3, every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I've given to you, just as I promised Moses. Every place where you put the sole of your foot, the word foot there is another one of those interesting words. It's the Hebrew word regal is foot, but foot is also the name given to infantry in the army and in the military in general. We've got Navy and Air Force, and in the army you've got some who go in tanks and some who run the artillery, but the foot soldier is still called infantry. And the infantry is the arm of the military that physically occupies ground. The battle isn't usually over until the infantry physically walks in and convinces the bad guys to come out of their holes. That's always true with every army in the entire history of the world. You might have catapults and all kinds of mules and people on horseback, but until the infantry with their swords or their M16s or whatever they're carrying, walk into a place and physically convince the opponents that it's time to give up, the battle isn't won. So this is what this picture is about. This shows actually two gladiators, but visualize infantry facing off. And God says, every place you put your foot is what I've promised you. Now, there's a warning that goes with that. Yeah, this is an important warning because the promise is not only to Joshua, but to the whole people. It's not just Joshua's foot, it's the feet of the infantry. If you choose not to put your foot some places, if for whatever lack of faith you refuse, you are disobedient, then those places will continue to be in Canaanite hands. And so there's a balance here. God is giving Joshua a command with a promise, and that's what a commission is all about. That's what a call is all about. When God calls us to salvation, that too is a command with a promise. And so Paul can talk about obeying the gospel over in the book of Romans. When we obey the gospel, we're doing that thing that God has called us to do, but recognizing that with the command to obey the gospel, there's a promise of eternal life and heaven forever with God. Uh, so it's not a hard command to obey. With the command to Joshua, this is a command: get up, arise, cross this river. And looking across the river now, he can see that the promised land is there, and it's actually a fairly difficult fight. The direction that Joshua is going through Jericho and up into the central hill country will be a more difficult fight than he would have faced otherwise. And Joshua can see that. Verse 4, the confirmation of the promises. From the wilderness to this Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites to the great sea, toward the going down of the sun, shall be your territory. That's rather a large promised land. The river Euphrates is the far side of what we know today as Syria. The Hittite country would be what we know today as Lebanon and parts of Turkey. The Great Sea, of course, is the Mediterranean, and the desert marks the other side. The southern boundary is going to end up being the river of Egypt, but that's not mentioned here because it's not necessary. The Sinai forms the southern boundary. Verse 5, no man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Again, there's a warning here. The promise is there. Here's the command: get up and go. The promise: every place that you put your foot is going to belong to you. I'm going to fulfill my promises. But the rest of it, all the days of your life. The promise that no one will be able to stand against Joshua is good for his lifetime. When Joshua is gone, the promise dies with it. And in fact, that's exactly what we see. During Joshua's lifetime, he won every battle, but only the battles that he won were ultimately won. We're going to end up with a bunch of Canaanites in the Low Country. I'll show you that map again, and we'll talk about that. Okay, just as I was with Moses, this is verse 5, middle of verse 5, just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. This is another part of the promise. Now, an encouragement: be strong and courageous. For you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous. Oh, wait a minute, didn't God just say that? Yeah, this is the second time. Being careful to do according to all of the law that Moses, my servant, commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may have good success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do all that is written in it. For then you shall make your way prosperous, and you shall have good success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Uh, People who have military experience know that it's almost always a mistake to volunteer for something. And if the captain comes through looking for volunteers for a job that he says is going to require strength and courage because it's going to be very dangerous, you know better than to volunteer for that. A lot of people don't come back from those. What God is telling Joshua here is, one, this is going to be a very dangerous thing. People could die, but I'm going to go with you. Therefore, operate with courage. So God has commanded him or called him with a command to get up and do this with a promise that everything is going to be well because I will go with you, and these people will inherit this land that I have promised to them. Only be strong and very courageous. And three times that's emphasized. Courage, I've defined, if you have your notes there, you'll see courage is the willingness to walk by faith in spite of insurmountable obstacles. What they were facing is actually a series of fairly difficult battles. This is going to be hand-to-hand combat against a much better prepared enemy than would have been in the land 40 years before. This is actually a fairly tough thing. God says you're going to have to be strong, you're going to have to show courage, you're going to have to walk by faith, you're going to have to trust me through this, even though it's difficult. And if you will do that, you will have good results. The other component of this is this idea of conviction. Now, the word conviction is not used in this passage, but this is what I'm seeing. God says to Joshua, you need to be spending time in the Word of God. This needs to be a serious part of your life. You need to understand what I have done and what I have said so that you can develop a strong set of convictions. You need to have a sure knowledge of the path to take based on the principles that are already laid down in Scripture. Convictions don't have to be numerous. There aren't all that many things that I would be willing to die for. But my convictions are hills that I would die on. The deity of Christ. I can't deny that. I can't go back on that. The triunity of God. That's clear. There's no question about it. It's difficult, but it's clear. The authority and inerrancy of Scripture. That's foundational. Without that, nothing else makes any difference. So all of these things those are convictions, and we can't back down on our convictions. The other things just don't matter. Am I only welcome to preach at some church if I get a haircut? Well, okay, fine. If I want to preach there, I'll get a haircut because that's not a conviction for me. If I can only do something by doing something, whatever. I'm willing to be all things to all people in order to reach as many as possible, up to a point, but I can't violate convictions. You shouldn't have convictions about absolutely everything. Convictions should be a fairly limited measure, but stand on what the scriptures actually stand for. Okay, the rest of this chapter goes on. Joshua assumes command in chapter 10 and begins to command the troops. Tells them what they need to do for the following day, and then the last paragraph of the chapter may not have been as encouraging to Joshua as it looks. And all the people answered Joshua, all that you have commanded us, we will do. Wherever you send us, we will go. Oh, that sounds great. Then look at verse 17. I love verse 17. I get the feeling that the people of Israel said this with no sense of irony at all. Just as we obeyed Moses in all things, so we will obey you. Seriously? Joshua must have been. I wonder if he managed to listen to that without rolling his eyes. Uh, poor Joshua. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your commandment and disobeys your word, whatever you command, shall be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. There it again. It's going to take tremendous strength and tremendous courage to put up with this people of Israel. Anyway, there we go. Chapter 2 takes us into the preparations for crossing over. And the first thing that happens is a pair of spies, and I love this story. This little house is called the it's John Garstang's stone structure. It's on the north east side of the tell of ancient Jericho. And it's the one structure that we have that dates for sure to the end of late Bronze 1. So this is a house inside the city of Jericho that fell to Joshua. Uh, we're quite sure because of the pottery that was found inside it. Nevertheless, there it is, and so that's all I've got. So I won't show you a whole bunch of pictures of Jericho, just this one. The sending of the spies, the mission of the spies, is described in chapter 2. Joshua sent 2 men secretly from Shittim, which is the plains of Moab, as spies, saying, "Go view the land, especially Jericho." And they came to the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab. Now let's talk about the mission. They're going to spy out the land, especially Jericho. And there's a couple of terms that are used here that are different from the mission that we saw back in the book of Numbers, chapters 14 and 15. There we saw 12 men sent on a reconnaissance patrol. It was armed reconnaissance, but they were not. They were hoping they didn't have to fight. In this episode, we see 2 men sent secretly. This is a covert operation. The 2 men probably dressed up like Canaanites. They practiced talking the Canaanite language. They tried to learn everything they could about what was going on in Jericho so that they could blend in with the local community. They were spies. They were spies in the sense of uh, people dropped by parachute behind enemy lines to send back radio information about what's going on in enemy occupied territory. They were sent in on a covert mission, in other words. What makes this interesting is that their mission was blown almost immediately. They didn't do much of a job of pretending to be Canaanites. Donna and I just watched an old movie. It's a 50-year-old movie called "The Russians Are Coming, the Russians Are Coming," which is very funny. And in that movie, the a Russian submarine goes aground off the coast of Massachusetts on a little island. And some of the Russians dress up like local islanders and try to convince people that they should get off the street. With their accent and their clothing and everything else, it's obvious that they're not local. What we've got here is two spies who are going to go into Jericho, and here is the story of them. We don't know the names of the spies, but I think I know one of them. I'll tell you that afterwards. Joshua sent these two spies and go see what's going on in Jericho. And so they went and came into the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab, and they lodged there. So this house we see in the main picture is not Rahab's house. That much we know because it wasn't in the wall. This is in an interior house, but Rahab had a house in the wall. We won't describe that, but except to say the walls around Jericho were double, and in peacetime, people could live in between the two walls. They could build houses there. And Rahab apparently had a house in the wall. She is called a prostitute, and her house, therefore, would be what we would call a house of prostitution or a brothel. Why would a couple of nice Jewish boys from Israel go to a prostitute's house? The simple answer is that prostitutes like Rahab often know what's happening on the street. They know what people are saying. They know what people are afraid of. They know what people are talking about. Prostitutes know what's going on because that's where they live. Modern policemen often talk to prostitutes, not simply to arrest them, but to get information, because prostitutes know what's happening. It's kind of a dirty business, and espionage is a dirty business. And these spies are doing the ancient Near Eastern version of spy work. This is tradecraft. This is how you get information. So they went to a prostitute's house and they lodged there, which is interesting. They decided that this would be a good place to just get a room. The reason it would be a good place to get a room is that strange men were always coming to Rahab's house. And businessmen from other parts of Canaan might be traveling up and down the Jordan Valley and stop into Jericho and spend the night at a prostitute's house without arising any great suspicions. And these two men knew that, and so this was tradecraft. And it was told, verse 2, the whole mission is blown in verse 2. And it was told to the king of Jericho, behold, the men of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land. So the king is getting actually very good intelligence. He has already seen, and his patrols have been out and are well aware of a gigantic army the other side of the river. There's no way to hide a group the size of Israel. They got sheep and goats and camels and lots of people and women and children and tents all over the place. It wouldn't take a lot of effort for them to know that the Israelites were there. And in fact, we know that the people of Canaan are afraid. The men of Jericho are afraid of this huge group. So it was told to the king of Jericho, behold, the men of Israel, and they know who these people are here tonight. They've come to search out the land. So the king said, king of Jericho sent to Rahab, everything is known. It is well known that these two men have gone into Rahab's house and they haven't come out. There are probably surveillance already in place. Uh, and the king says to Rahab, "Bring out the men who've come into you, who entered your house, for they've come to search out the land." But the woman had taken the two men and hidden them, and she said, now this is interesting. This is fascinating. But the woman said, "It is true, the men came to me, but I did not know where they were from. And when the gate was about to be closed at dark, the men went out, and I don't know where they've gone. Pursue them quickly, for you will overtake them." Okay, Rahab's lie was necessary to save the lives of these two men. What has she done? In fact, her lie is not merely a little white lie; it's an act of treason. Rahab is a Canaanite prostitute. Some have argued that she is a temple prostitute. In either situation, Rahab's position in Canaanite society is a very important position. She has a privileged position uh, as uh, uh, as a person who is central to the carrying out of Canaanite religion. Canaanite religion demanded acts of prostitution in order to encourage the gods to provide fertility for the land. Rahab was doing not something illegal in Jericho, but something honorable that provided her with an excellent living and a place of respect in her society. She is turning her back on her own people and betraying her people to the enemy. This is treason. So we have to ask ourselves, what is going on here? This goes on. And instead, she had brought them up on the roof and hid them under stalks of flax that she'd laid out on the roof. So the men pursued after them on the way to the Jordan as far as the fords. So you've got the Canaanite cavalry checking out Rahab's house. Rahab says, "No, they went that way. Hurry up, and you can maybe catch them, cut them off at the fords of the Jordan," and off they go. Rahab then went up on the roof, and the gate was shut. Verse 8: Before the men lay down, she came up to them and said to the men, "I know that the Lord has given you the land." And it's interesting that this author of Joshua puts the Lord's name in Rahab's mouth. That's a name that is only used by believers usually. Balaam got a hold of it, but how did Rahab? I don't know. Uh, we know that the Lord has given you the land. The fear of you has fallen on us. The word is actually terror. The land was unreasonably fearful. All the inhabitants of the land melt before you. By the way, this is excellent intelligence. This is very good news for Joshua. For we've heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea and all of the other good things. And verse 11, as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted. There's no spirit left in any man. For the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. What Rahab is noting here, what she is confessing, is that the God of Israel is the God of heaven and earth, unlike the god Baal that the Canaanites worshipped, or Asherah and Ishtar, the prostitute gods. Uh, 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 Yahweh is the God of eternity. Yahweh is the creator. Yahweh stands out beyond the created universe and creates as he will. The, the gods of Canaan are mere personifications of the creation itself. They are no gods at all. And Rahab recognizes that fact. Rahab is making a confession of her own faith. The Lord your God is God in the heavens above and earth beneath. Now, please swear to me by the Lord that as I have dealt kindly with you, you also will deal kindly with me, and give me a sure sign that you will save alive my father and my brothers and sisters, all who belong to them, and deliver us. And the men said, our lives for yours, even to the death. If you do not tell this business of ours, then when the Lord gives us the land, we will deal kindly and faithfully with you. Two very important words there, kindly and faithfully. The Hebrew words are chesed and emet. Uh, Chesed is a word that's often used of love. In the Old Testament, loyal love is sometimes the way we translate the word chesed. It's often the love that God shows for his people. It can sometimes be the irrational love of a mother for her children. It's a love that doesn't ever let go. It is preeminently the love of God for his people. So the spies promise God's love. We will show you chesed, love, the kind of love that God shows, and faithfulness. The word faithfulness is another very, very important word. Emet, E-M-E-T. It's related to some other Old Testament words that we translate faith and faithfulness and faithfully and just plain faith. The amen at the end of a prayer comes from this word emet. So when the spies promise chesed and emet, loyal love or kindness and faithfulness, they're promising God's kind of love, salvation love for Rahab. Now, what does all of that mean? Well, among other things, we're going to see that Rahab and her family are saved out of Jericho. They're the only survivors. And we're going to discover that Rahab becomes a part of the nation of Israel. Now, something I didn't mention going through Deuteronomy is there's a section in Deuteronomy and another section in Leviticus that tells us we're not supposed to take any Canaanites, and especially not any prostitutes. Leviticus is real careful about prostitutes. Don't you dare marry a prostitute, and the day that you do, both of you shall die. Later on, we're going to see that the prostitute Rahab married an Israelite man named Salmon. Now, I'm just romantic enough to believe that Salmon is one of the two spies. I'd like it to be that way. The Bible doesn't say. But Salmon married Rahab. And instead of the Israelites putting them both to death, they remained alive and they had children. And their children grew up and had children who grew up and had children, and there in the line is Boaz. Boaz, you remember Boaz maybe, who at the end of the book of Judges in the little book of Ruth is going to marry Ruth. Whoa. Now, Ruth and Boaz are going to have children who have children who have children, one of whom is Jesse, who is the father of David. Now, both Rahab and Ruth are outcasts, they're outlanders, they're not allowed to be a part of the nation of Israel. God made room for both of them, not only in the people of Israel, but in the lineage of Christ. I think it's wrong for us ever, under any circumstances, to say that somebody is so bad that God can never save them. It isn't true. God is entirely capable of saving the most outlandishly bad people. We should never stop praying, and we should never stop sharing. Uh, God saved Rahab, and she's a part of the lineage of Christ. And we'll see the rest of that story unfold. So we come to all of the promises go down, and they're going to show respect. And the spies went away. They departed, went back to Joshua. I told Joshua uh, all of the important stuff he needed to know. Chapter 3 takes us up to the actual crossing of the Jordan River itself. The preparation for crossing is in the first few verses here. The Levites will go out in front, and there's a distance of about 2,000 cubits, which is about a kilometer between the people of Israel and the Levites. The Levites are way out in front. That way, everybody can know the path. This photograph is one that Donna may remember. This was taken many years ago when we came to Israel through Amman, Jordan, and had to drive in a taxi cab from Amman down to the Allenby Bridge to cross the Jordan River. Let me make let me turn my pointer into a laser. Here's the road that we're driving down. And I shot this picture out of a moving taxi cab. This fellow was driving real fast, 140 kilometers an hour, as I recall, down this horrendously awful road, trying to get to the Jordan River before the bridge closed. And while he was doing that, he was showing me pictures from his wallet of his relatives in the U.S. Here's my uncle Mordecai in Chicago, and I'm going nuts, trying to relax by taking pictures. What you see here is Jordan River. This is the Jordan River Valley in the middle distance. Palm trees on the Jordanian side, and then off in the distance you see the hills going up. The hills are just barely visible in the background here. And the one smudge right in the middle of this picture is Jericho. That's the only green, relatively fertile patch on the far side of the Jordan. That's where we're heading. That's where Joshua is intending to go. The difficulty of crossing the Jordan River at the time of year that it was done, which would be in springtime, about Passover time, is that all of this ground between just beyond the palm trees and to the other side, just in front of Jericho, would be covered with water. This would be very muddy, deep, rolling, muddy, clogged up, flooded Jordan. Every spring it would be the same way. And we know this from as recently as 100 years ago. The British General Allenby had to cross the Jordan River in order to go the other direction. He had taken Jerusalem and needed to cross the Jordan to get to Amman, Jordan. And it was a very difficult crossing. He lost quite a few men, engineers in the crossing. One of the bridges washed away completely, and he finally managed to get a pontoon bridge across the river and get motorized troops across. But it was a very difficult thing. The modern bridge is still a military bridge, and it's named the Allenby Bridge to this day because of the difficulty of that crossing. So here we go in chapter 3. Joshua said to the people, "Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you." That's one of my favorite verses in Joshua. Really like that word. The word consecration is a special verb form. It's a plural, and it's the imperative. It's a command. So what Joshua is saying, you all consecrate yourselves. So it's uh, it's a personal setting apart. It's a reflexive verb. Uh, this particular verb form, the plural reflexive imperative, consecrate yourselves, is only used 7 times in the Old Testament, this particular form, where an entire people group is being told, consecrate yourselves. Every time we look at each of those 7 spots in the Bible, every time God is preparing to do some mighty work, either a work of judgment or some miracle of deliverance. So God is saying, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders. That's word wonders means miracles. The crossing of the Jordan River is about to happen. We'll be crossing at flood stage, crossing where the Kirkar mud is thousands of meters deep. We're going to cross this tomorrow, and it's going to require a miracle. So consecrate yourselves. Now I would ask myself, what does it mean to consecrate? The word consecrate, every place that it's used in the Bible, is derived from the word holy. Literally, we could say, make yourselves holy. And some people think that means, oh, spend the night in prayer, spend the night fasting, spend the night reading a holy book. And of course, those are all good things to do. I'm not criticizing those things. But what were the people of Israel expected to do prior to their crossing? The word consecrate in Hebrew means to set aside for a specific task. If I have a plate of cookies for the school kids who are coming tomorrow afternoon, and I set them aside on the counter, those are holy cookies. They've been set aside. They've been consecrated for a special use. There's nothing religious about the word. If I have a tool in my box that I only use for certain jobs, I have a torque wrench that I only use for rebuilding the heads on motors. That's a holy torque wrench. If I only use my chainsaw for cutting brush, that's a holy chainsaw. The word consecrate can mean set apart for a specific purpose. The purpose of the people of Israel today is to cross the Jordan River and fight a war of conquest on the far side. So what should they do tonight? Sharpen their swords. Make sure that their helmet straps are tight. Make sure their sandals are well repaired and ready to go. Practice what they will be doing as they cross that river and set up camp on the far side. Set yourselves apart means to get yourself ready to do this thing that God has called you to do. I think the reason that we Christians don't see more spectacular works of God in our own communities today, not to say miracles, because I don't think God does that, but spectacular acts of God, is that we, for the most part, refuse to set ourselves apart, to prepare for those mighty acts of God. What do? We need to study more. We need to train more. We need to prepare. We need to train leaders. We need to learn to follow our leaders. The people of Israel are told, consecrate yourselves. God is about to do a mighty work in your midst. And so Joshua said to the priest, take up the Ark of the Covenant, go do this. And the Lord said, today I'm going to bring up a big thing. And as they go, the Lord told Joshua, hold out your hand and shout. The Jordan River opened wide And the water, we're told, stood up at a place called Adamia, or Adam, which is upstream from the location of the bridge by about 2 kilometers. As they crossed the river, Joshua told his men, pick 12 men and pick up 12 stones. And when you pick up those 12 stones, pile them up where you camp tonight, and that will be a memorial for you. Now, by the way, this photograph is not of those 12 stones. These stones are actually quite a bit bigger. They're all about 3 to 4 meters tall. This is at Tel Gezer, one of the Canaanite cities. Get 12 rocks. And so you've got 12 privates in the Israeli army here who get the job of picking up 12 of the biggest rocks they can carry and carrying those all the way to the place that they'll camp tonight. You can imagine they probably complained, but soldiers are never happy unless they've got something to complain about. These guys did. 12 rocks, and we're going to put those down. Why 12 stones? What's the reason for the 12 stones? This was to be a memorial. You will pile these stones up into a recognizable heap of stones, and years from now, your children will ask, Dad, what are these rocks here for? Every time we walk down this road, we go past this pile of stones and you stop and salute. Why? What is this about? And you, Dad, will tell your sons, I'm glad you asked, because a long time ago, our fathers crossed this river by a mighty act of God. When God fulfilled his promise to his people, and we live in this good and prosperous land flowing with milk and honey because of the act of God that day. I like the idea of families remembering the great acts of God along the way. When God answers our prayers, it doesn't hurt to buy a commemorative plate from the place where it happened or whatever. Pick up something that we can remember. Donna and I have done that, and it's a good thing. For one thing, it will allow your children to ask, and it will give you an opportunity to tell the story. The people of Israel built memorials so that they'd have opportunities to tell the story. When our memorials come down, when we forget them, the memories go with them. This, by the way, is what's happening in much of the world today, especially in the West, in the United States. A modern group of modern terrorists are pulling down statues and memorials. We're actually having to defend them. Because if we lose our memorials, we lose a part of our history. Our spiritual memorials are every bit as important. So some of the pictures on our walls, some of the old things that we keep around our houses are there simply so the children can ask questions later. Okay, chapter 5, we see the Israelites crossing the Jordan River. This is a photograph of the Israeli side of the Jordan River. It is probably not very close to the place where they camped. The place is called Gilgal, and we don't know exactly where Gilgal was. I have some preferences for the location of Gilgal, but I'm probably wrong. The first 12 verses tell us that as they crossed the river, the first thing that the people did was that all of the men who had been born in the wilderness who had not been circumcised were taken and circumcised. Now, Moses knew that this was coming. Why didn't he give the order to have everybody circumcised on the Moabite side when things were safe? He didn't, and now Joshua is doing it, and it's on the Israel side of the Jordan River, under the walls of Jericho, in the within easy sight range of the enemy. And for several days, probably close to a week, the men of Israel, particularly the young men of Israel who will be fighting this battle, are incapacitated. They're not merely uncomfortable, they probably will have trouble walking, let alone fighting. And the circumcision happens there as an act of obedience and, most importantly, as an act of faith. These young men, the soldiers, are saying, we trust God enough to do this thing. After the circumcision and after they have healed, Passover is celebrated in verse 10. The first Passover since leaving the Sinai. And then in verses 11 and 12, the first produce of the land is eaten, and significantly, no more manna comes down. And so the people have come out of the wilderness wanderings. Now they have come into the promised land. And with the circumcision, the Passover, and the eating of the produce, it is official. We are now within the land of Israel. The rest of this chapter I find fascinating. We're just going to get started with it because this takes us into the second section of the conquest narrative here. But the beginning here is the introduction of the divine commander. And actually, this isn't what the angel of the Lord actually looks like. This is a picture of one of the Caesars. I'm not even sure which Caesar, but I kind of liked him. He's got his sword there by his left hand, and he's got his other hand up to start an oration, and he's got his armor on. This statue is found in the museum in Naples. If you ever get down there, but it's this probably it gives you an idea what the angel of the Lord may have looked like. Here we have it. Joshua was near Jericho, and he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went up to him and said, are you for us or for our adversaries? Now, what Joshua was saying there was a precisely appropriate question. When a soldier is on guard duty, whether he's the lowliest private or the commander of the army, if he's in a place where outsiders could conceivably get in, it is totally appropriate to say, halt, who goes there, identify friend or foe. So which are you? Are you a friend or are you a foe? Advance and be recognized, which usually involves opening up your ID to show that you belong in this place that you're approaching. So Joshua says, halt, who goes there, friend or foe, advance and be recognized. And the man that he sees with a drawn sword answers no. Halt, who goes there, friend or foe? So the answer that Joshua is looking for is either friend or foe. I'm either for you or against you, friend or foe. This is not a yes or no question. And yet the commander of the Lord's army answers no. Joshua, I'm neither on your side nor on your enemy's side, but as the commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come. Now, we don't know who this is. The long-held tradition is that this is the angel of the Lord. Some of the early church fathers, particularly Origen, whose commentary is well known on this passage, argues that this is actually Christ. Most of us in the modern era don't say that. There are some similarities, but I think we can say that this is a mighty and very important angel who is operating as the commander of the armies of the Lord. Now, those armies may well consist of angels. And Joshua is being introduced to the battle plan, the tactical situation that he will be asked to handle in tomorrow's battle. And the question then is, who are you? Identify yourself, friend or foe. And the answer, no. I didn't come to take sides. I've come to take over. I'm not on your side, Joshua, but if you have any sense at all, you will be on my side. So we might want to ask the question, who is on the Lord's side? God doesn't join sides. God does his thing in the world. God does his mighty works. God does his plan. He accomplishes his tasks, and we are free to join him if we choose. God has a mighty army already, and he will win the battle. Who is on the Lord's side? Stand and be counted. That's the point of this passage. So the angel of the Lord says, I'm the commander of the army of the Lord, and I've come. So Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshiped. It's an act of submission. If you're the commander of the Lord's army, I want to join up. Where do I enlist? He submits to the authority of the angel of the Lord. And he says, what does my Lord say to his servant? And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, take off your sandals, for the place you're standing is holy. And Joshua did so, recognizing that this miracle that God is about to do is going to be put into operation by the commands that he's about to receive. In chapter 6, we see the actual description of how this is going to happen. I think we'll stop now, and we'll start again with this Battle of Jericho on Friday, because the battle is fascinating. It's a complete miracle. Some of the battles that Joshua will fight don't require miracles. God simply fights on Joshua's side, and the battle is won because Joshua is a good soldier. The Battle of Jericho is won because of the mighty hand of God. That's going to be clear for everyone to see. So as we move along, today things worked reasonably well. As we move along, we're going to see this Battle of Jericho. Let me get our participants unmuted so we can all hear. And now we can all hear. Hi there.
Hi, thank you, Dr. John.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Jan.
I love the story of Jericho. We're going to come back and do some more Jericho on Friday, and we'll go on to the rest of the conquest and get us out of the Jordan Valley and into the hill country of Israel. It's all kind of fun. We look forward to seeing everybody again on Friday. I hope our internet connection is better on Friday. God bless you all, guys.
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye, bye, bye. Bye,
Good
bye.
night.
Thank you.
Love you guys. We'll
Bye,
see you.
bye, Donna.
Ciao.
Thank you so much.
Buonanotte.
Our pleasure.
Bye.
Bye, bye, Sally. Bye,
A
Oscar.
domani.
Buonanotte a tutti.
Buonanotte
Thank you.
po.
Thank
Buonanotte
you.
a tutti.
Buonanotte.
Buonanotte a tutti.
Notte, notte.
Okay.